One of these westerns was banned for 30 years. Another one, the lead actor called it the worst experience of his life. And one of them lost its studio $190 million. Tarantino thinks you need to watch all of them. In 1950, James Stewart's career was dying. He'd come back from the war and made a bunch of post-war films that flopped. His career was in serious trouble. Then he got offered Winchester 73. The studio didn't have the budget to pay him his usual fee of $200,000, so Stewart suggested something different, give him a cut of the profits instead. First time that kind of deal had been done since talkies started. The studio agreed because what did they have to lose? The movie follows Stewart as a cowboy hunting down an outlaw he has history with. At the same time, a prized Winchester rifle keeps passing from one owner to the next, kind of like the Elder Wand in Harry Potter. Everybody who gets it ends up dead. Director Anthony Mann wanted it to look authentic, and Stewart took that seriously. He started preparing way in advance, practicing with the rifle for hours every day. Mann said later that Stewart practiced so much his knuckles were raw and bleeding. The movie saved Stewart's career. He ended up making about $600,000 from the profit-sharing deal, and that arrangement changed Hollywood completely. Tarantino calls Anthony Mann one of his favorite Western directors, and this is Mann's best film by far. In 1996, Tarantino put together his own film festival in Austin, Texas, and one of the movies he selected was this 1967 spaghetti western, directed by Sergio Corbucci. The plot's pretty straightforward. There's a washed-up Confederate colonel played by Joseph Cotton, and he's got his 3 sons with him. They're hauling a hearse around the post-Civil War landscape, and inside that hearse is stolen money and weapons. The colonel's plan is to use it all to reorganize the Confederacy and restart the war. Of course, things don't go well. But here's what Tarantino loved about it. In most westerns, you've got your hero, you've got your villain, maybe some morally gray characters in between. The Hellbenders doesn't have that. Tarantino said everybody in the movie is the bad guy. There's one woman who's more of a victim, but otherwise it's just bad guys and more bad guys. Nobody to root for. Corbucci again, and this one's probably his most famous. Django stars Franco Nero in his first major role as an ex-Union soldier dragging a coffin through the mud. He's out to kill Major Jackson, the Confederate who murdered his lover. Spoiler about the coffin, there's a Gatling gun inside it. Django rescues a woman from Confederate soldiers, refuses to pick sides between Confederates and Mexican revolutionaries, and plots an assassination while fighting off Red Mask Klansmen. It spawned over 30 unofficial sequels. There's one scene that got it banned in Great Britain for almost 30 years. The main villain slices off a guy's ear and makes him eat it. If that sounds familiar, it's because Tarantino copied it in Reservoir Dogs when Mr. Blonde cuts off the cop's ear. Tarantino's borrowed from Django constantly. Django Unchained obviously takes the name, uses the original film score for the opening, uses the same typeface for the title sequence. Franco Nero even has a cameo where he meets Jamie Foxx's Django and they discuss how to spell the name. Tarantino's talked about how Corbucci's westerns are different from everyone else's. He said Corbucci created the most violent, surreal, and pitiless version of the West that any director has ever made. In another director's western, Corbucci's heroes would be the bad guys. This one's a disaster from the start. Corbucci thinks he's getting Marlon Brando to star in his new western. Burt Reynolds thinks he's making a movie with Sergio Leone. Both of them are wrong. Reynolds shows up and it's Corbucci directing, not Leone. And the movie's about a Native American, played by Reynolds, avenging his tribe after they get slaughtered by scalp hunters. Reynolds hated every second of it. He's called it the worst professional experience of his life in multiple interviews. He said the movie was so awful it was only shown in prisons and airplanes because nobody could leave. He almost broke his neck doing the stunts, and he described his costume as a Japanese slingshot and a fright wig. But Tarantino thinks it's one of the greatest revenge movies ever made. He said Reynolds as Navajo Joe is a one-man tornado. The way he uses his knife and fights through the rocks and dirt is magnificent. And before The Wild Bunch came out, Navajo Joe was the most violent movie that had ever carried a Hollywood studio logo. Tarantino's called this his favorite Western of the 1970s. Robert Aldrich directed it, Burt Lancaster starred in it, and a Scottish screenwriter named Alan Sharp, who Tarantino also calls a favorite, wrote the script. The movie's about a small cavalry patrol tracking an Apache group that's left the reservation. It's gritty and small scale, and the Apaches are shown as smart and determined, not just as enemies. Burt Lancaster was basically a producer on this thing, even though he wasn't credited. He helped get it made, took a percentage instead of a salary, and had a say in the editing. The whole thing was filmed in 7 weeks for $1.2 million, which was way faster and cheaper than Aldrich's usual movies. Aldrich later admitted he wasn't entirely satisfied with how it turned out, and the film's been criticized over the years for how it portrays Native Americans, even though Lancaster himself was a major supporter of liberal causes. But Tarantino loves it because it combines the two genres Aldrich was known for, westerns and war films. He calls it hands down Aldrich's best film of the 70s and one of the greatest westerns of that decade. This one's from Japanese director Takashi Miike, and it's exactly what it sounds like, a western mixed with martial arts and samurai films. A nameless gunfighter shows up in a town torn apart by rival gangs. Both sides want him to join them, and he plays his own game instead. The whole thing's an homage to Sergio Leone and Sergio Corbucci, but it also references a Japanese civil war from centuries ago, which is perfect because Leone's Dollars trilogy and Corbucci's Django were based on Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo in the first place. So this movie brings the Western full circle back to Japan. Tarantino has a cameo in it playing this Clint Eastwood-type character, and he loved doing it. He said it was a dream come true because he'd always wanted to work in a Japanese movie and see what it was like. Getting to do it with Miike, who he considers one of the greatest living directors, made it even better. It's a bit of a cheat to include this one since Tarantino's actually in it, but it's too entertaining to leave off the list. Tarantino's not a John Ford fan. He'll tell you that straight up, but even he admits Stagecoach is kind of undeniable. This is the movie that made John Wayne a star. A group of travelers, a sex worker, a whiskey salesman, a snobbish southerner, and others get stranded at an isolated frontier outpost in Arizona. They board a stagecoach heading to Lordsburg. Among them is Ringo Kid, an outlaw who just got out of prison. Then Geronimo and his Apache warriors attack the stage, and they all have to fight to survive. Wayne himself said this was the picture that really made him a star. Roger Ebert put it on his list of great movies, which is notoriously hard to crack. The movie revitalized the whole Western genre. Ford's direction brought the frontier to life in a way that still holds up today. Tarantino told Film Inc. that he actually loves the film and thinks you can make a case that it was a big jump forward in modern filmmaking. He said it holds up beautifully even now. Marlon Brando spent years trying to get backing for an adaptation of Thomas Berger's novel Little Big Man. Couldn't make it happen. Eventually, it ended up with director Arthur Penn. The story follows Jack Crabb, an old man who was raised by the Cheyenne and spent his life going back and forth between white and indigenous society. It's a satire of Western tropes, but it's also got comedy and adventure mixed in. Dustin Hoffman plays the aged-up Jack. There was actually a real Little Big Man in history. He was an Oglala Lakota warrior who fought under and rivaled Crazy Horse. He fought at the Battle of Little Big Horn, which the movie depicts. Arthur Penn, the director, once said he's known mainly for making movies about people shooting and cutting each other up. This movie proved he was more than that. Tarantino's a big fan of this one. He even called it a blood brother to Django Unchained. You can definitely see the connection. The revisionist approach, the way it satirizes Western tropes while still being a Western. This one's complicated. It's widely considered one of the greatest Westerns ever made, but it's also one of the darkest and most uncomfortable to watch. John Wayne plays Ethan Edwards, a Civil War vet who spends years searching for his kidnapped niece. Tarantino's actually criticized parts of The Searchers, but that hasn't stopped him from paying tribute to it. Remember that iconic closing shot where Wayne stands in the doorway? He's recreated it in both Kill Bill and Inglourious Basterds. The movie's influence is massive. Scorsese, Spielberg, Lucas, Paul Schrader, John Milius, they all swear by it. Even Game of Thrones lifted elements from it for the loot train attack in Season 7. Scorsese puts it in his top 10 films of all time. Martin Scorsese said what makes The Searchers so shocking is how deep Ethan Edwards' hatred runs. And he's right. This movie lingers with you in a way most classic westerns don't. It was uncomfortable when it came out, and it's still uncomfortable now. Disney lost $190 million on The Lone Ranger. They wrote it off while the movie was still just a couple weeks into its theatrical run. The problems were pretty obvious. Westerns have never been popular overseas, and this thing had an estimated budget of $250 million plus $150 million in marketing costs. There was basically no way it was going to make that money back. The cast and crew even took salary cuts to help with costs. But the spending issues were public knowledge by then, so the film had negative press before it even came out. When it finally released, critics tore it apart. Audiences stayed away. It became a punchline for expensive Hollywood disasters. But Tarantino was one of the few people who defended it. He put it on his personal top 10 of 2013. He praised the set pieces and said it had an old-fashioned adventure spirit. Tarantino said the first 45 minutes were excellent. The next 45 were a little slow. He thought splitting the bad guys into two groups was a mistake because it takes too long to explain and nobody cares. But then the train sequence at the end was incredible.